Game 7. White, J.R. Capablanca. Black, D.Janowsky. San Sebastian, 1911. Queen's Pawn opening. Strange things happen in this exciting game. Janowski outplays his formidable opponent in the mid-game complications. Janowski spurns 4 opportunities to draw by perpetual check, 2 at each side of the board. Janowski misses a win by checking at the wrong square, nearer the king instead of at the end of the board. Capablanca rallies from a near knockout, springs back like the giant Antaeus after touching the earth, and demolishes his opponent in the endgame. The ending, highlighted by a remarkable queen and knight combinative play, is equal in power and beauty to any in the entire literature of chess. d4, d5, e3. Cautious play, but this was Capablanca's first international tournament, and he may have been self-conscious and perhaps awed by the reputations of these great masters whom he was meeting for the first time. Knight f6, knight f3, c5, c4, e6, knight c3, bishop e7. This loses a tempo, as the bishop will have to recapture the c-pawn after white plays d takes c5. He might have tried knight c6, a3, knight e4, the line with which Marshall beat him brilliantly at Cambridge Springs in 1904. Back to the game. Bishop e7, d takes c5, castle, a3, bishop takes c5, b4, bishop e7. One would expect Janowski to play bishop to e6, d6, excuse me, bishop b2, a5, b5, b6. Black's last 2 moves assure him control of the square c5. C takes d5, e takes d5. Black has compensation for his isolated queen pawn, and the pressure it exerts on the squares c4 and e4, and his 2 active bishops. Knight d4 blockades the queen pawn and prevents as well the development of black by bishop to f5. Bishop d6, bishop e2. Capablanca explains that g3 seemed the proper continuation, but this being his first big tournament, he feared being criticized for creating such a formation of pawns on the king side. Hence, the selection of this bad move against my better judgment. Back to the game. Bishop e2, bishop e6, bishop f3. Rook a7. This unusual but good deployment of the queen's rook is found often in Reshevsky's games. Castles, rook c7, queen b3, knight d7, rook f d1, The tempting knight to c6 loses two pieces for a rook by rook takes c6, b takes c6, d4, knight d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, knight c5, queen a2, knight takes d5. There's a lot of activity at d5, and white may not play queen takes d5, as bishop takes h2 would win the queen. Back to the game. Rook f d1, knight e5, bishop e2, queen e7, rook a c1. Capablanca now decides to simplify the position to relieve the pressure. He saw the coming combination, but was confident of being able to weather the storm. Rook fc8, knight a4, rook takes c1, rook takes c1, rook takes c1 check, bishop takes c1, knight e4, bishop b2. If knight takes b6, queen c7 would be painful. Back to the game. Bishop b2, knight c4. What centralization? Bishop takes c4. Bishop takes h2 check. Much better than d takes c4, queen c2, and white has equalized. This assures black of a draw at least by perpetual check. Bishop takes h2, king takes h2, queen h4 check, king g1, queen takes f2 check, king h2, queen g3 check, king g1, carefully avoiding king h1 when bishop h3, bishop f1, knight f2 check, king g1, knight g4 forces mate. So king g1 was played, d takes c4, queen c2, queen e3 check, king h2, queen h6 check, king g1, queen e3 check, king h2, queen g3 check, king g1, queen e1 check, king h2, knight f6. Disdaining the draw, the ingenious Janowski finds other ways to renew the attack. Now he threatens knight to g4, king h3, and knight e3. winning the queen. For example, back to the game. Knight takes e6. Queen h4 check. King g1. Queen e1 check. King h2. Queen h4 check. King g1. Knight g4. Queen d2. The only move, as Queen c3 to guard the e1 square allows Queen f2 check and mate the next move, while bishop to c3, again guarding e1, loses after Queen h2, King f1, and Knight e3 check, and the queen falls. So back to the game. Queen d2, Queen h2 check, King f1, Queen h1 check, King e2, Queen takes g2, King d1, Knight f2 check, King c2, Queen g6 check, King c1, Queen g1 check, King c2, Queen g6 check, King c1, Knight d3 check, King b1, f takes e6, Queen c2. Of course not. Knight takes b6, and Queen g1 check, winning the knight. Back to the game. Queen c2. Capablanca says King a2 instead of the text would have given him a draw. But back to the game. Queen c2, h5. Black has a flock of pawns for the piece, including a dangerous king rook pawn which threatens to run to the 8th square. That Capablanca should be able to save the game, let alone win it, borders on the miraculous. The situation does not seem to be in White's favor. He is faced with impending disaster by threats of discovered attack, and he must cope with a wicked-looking rook pawn on its way to becoming a queen. All the more reason to admire psychologically Capablanca's sang-froid and technically the skillful way in which he combines attack and defense in a difficult endgame. Bishop d4. The bishop not only attacks the knight pawn, but prepares to restrain the ambitious rook pawn. Alternatives are found wanting. Knight takes b6 loses by Queen g1 check, while Queen takes c4 is met by h4, and if then queen takes c4 is meant by h4, excuse me. And if then queen takes h4, the reply, knight b4 check, causes a quick mate. Okay, back to the game. Bishop d4, h4, bishop takes b6. Now white has a passed pawn too, to add to the excitement. h3, bishop c7, e5, blocks the path of the bishop and faces white with the threat of queen g1, followed by h2. b6, a win or lose move. Capablanca underestimated the strength of black's position, or he would have played the safer queen takes c4 check when king f8, bishop d6 check, queen takes d6, queen c8 check, followed by queen takes h3, would probably have led to a draw. Back to the game. b6, queen e4. This move I had not properly considered, says Capablanca, though it was the only one to win. Strangely enough, Janowski had remarked at this point, "This is the only move," but missed the right continuation afterward. Janowski's multi-purpose move prevents the advance of white's passed pawn, protects his own bishop pawn, and keeps white's knight on the sidelines, out of the game. If knight b2, h2, queen takes h2, queen e1 check, king a2, knight c1 check, king b1, knight b3 check, king c2, queen c1 is mate. Back to the game. Bishop takes e5, queen e1 check. Janowski was so intent on this check, the key move in the two previous variations, that he checks at the wrong square. The right way to check was at h1, when the queen could keep tight surveillance on white's passed pawn. Janowski apparently missed the point completely. He analyzed the position after the game for 2 hours, never saw where he made the error, and had to be told by the other masters. So queen e1 check was played, king a2. And now Janowski has a fourth opportunity to draw by perpetual check. He can do so by knight c1 check, King B1, knight C3, knight D3 check, King A2, knight C1. Back to the game. Knight takes E5. He does not take it, and with that goes his last chance. Before continuing, says Capablanca, I should add that the coming endgame is perhaps the finest of its kind ever played, and that for some unknown reason it has not been properly appreciated. It is a masterpiece, one of which I am very proud and which should be carefully studied. B7, knight D7, knight C5. An important move. The subsequent play will show why this is superior to knight B6. Knight B8. Queen takes C4 check. King H8. Knight E4. The knight is beautifully centralized. It guards white's king against annoying checks by the queen, and is also in perfect position to take part in combination play against black's king and queen. For example, if H2, Queen C8 check, King H7, Queen H3 check, King G8, Queen E6 check, King H8, Queen E8 check, King H7, Knight G5 check, and wins the queen. Back to the game. King H7, Queen D3, G6. If Queen H4, Knight G5 check, King H6, Knight F7 check, King H5, Queen F5, G5, Knight E5, and wins. Back to the game. G6, Queen takes H3 check, King G7, Queen F3, Queen C1, hoping desperately for a fifth try at perpetual check, but opportunity has tired of knocking. Queen F6 check, King H7, Queen F7 check, King H6. If King H8, Queen F8 check, King H7, Knight F6 is mate. So King H6, Queen F8, King H5, Queen H8 check, King G4, Queen C8 check. Forcing an exchange of queens, the promotion of the pawn to a queen, and the end of resistance. Black resigns.